Court TV viewers who watched the trial of Timothy Ferritor were outraged. How could a father lock his own son in a box in the garage? Why would a dad leave his teenage son alone in a windowless room with a mattress on the floor next to a bucket? It seemed cruel and outrageous. The jury agreed, and Timothy Ferritor was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But tonight, we take a look at a mother accused of behavior that makes Ferritor's conduct seem mild. Shanda Vander Ark also had a teenage son with special needs. His name was Timothy. Prosecutors say Timothy was forced to sleep in a locked closet with an alarm. He was denied food, forced to take ice baths, and was found dead inside the home in 2022. At the time, 15-year-old Timothy only weighed 69 pounds. Prosecutors also say Shanda enlisted the help of Timothy's older brother, Paul, to help torture him. Tonight, we take a look at what happened inside this home in Muskogee, Michigan. Listen to the testimony of Paul as he testifies against his mother as we investigate the torture and death of Timothy Ferguson.
I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. I'm going to tell you up front, this hour, it's going to be dark. This is going to be a dark hour because of what we are going to talk about. But I think it's important. I think it's extremely important to expose what is alleged in this case and what happened to this child. Because there are other children who need our help. Because there's a lot of bad mothers out there. Think about these two hated mothers, Lori Daybell and that woman from Central Florida. America learned to hate these two for what they did. The problem was no one could jump in there. There was no calls before they did what they did or were alleged to have done. Right? There were no calls. There were no family services coming in, intervening before these things were happening. It's a little different with our new alleged villain tonight. This woman, I mean, she had a track record already before any of the dark, dark things you're going to hear about in this program happened. And I think at some point we have to have the discussion about why was she permitted to be in this child's life? How did that happen? But tonight we're going to focus on what happened, how it happened, and what the details are to really try to get some grasp for just how depraved this woman allegedly is and the way she treated her son with special needs. This is interesting. At the beginning of the show, I like to kind of outline things and introduce you to the people that we'll be talking about in these relationships, but there's not even a photo of the victim here. Could you imagine having a child and not having like 1,000 pictures everywhere? Can't really locate a picture of this child other than after he died. And those pictures we cannot show on television. Cannot. But not even a photo. And to me, that's a great, that's a great litmus test, right? I mean, there have been cases where people have alleged that their child went missing in a certain date, but no one had seen him for 3 months. And I'm like, well, if they were here the whole time, you should have a whole bunch of pictures. Especially when they're young and growing up. You want to, you mark birthdays, holidays, and sometimes you just mark a moment. That wasn't the case here, but it went way, way beyond all of that. I'm telling you, this stuff is dark, depraved. We're talking about torture. We're talking about evil tonight on this program. Inside the courtroom, Timothy, the victim, has an older brother named Paul, who apparently his mother enlisted, but has taken some sort of a deal and is testifying against his mother and is outlining some of the things that were happening to this child. It is awful. I don't know where this comes from, and that's one of the things we're going to try to understand tonight, how this evil can exist, where it comes from, how to spot it, and hopefully how our system can do something to protect our children. Right? Every night at the end of this program, I say, don't forget to hug the kids. The kids. That means all the kids out there, right? And when I say hug, I mean keep an eye out. Let's protect the children. We're the adults. We're the adults in the world. That's our responsibility, to take care of the children. So if you see or know of a child that is in danger, in need of help, that's our job. Whether it's a phone call or whether it's physical intervention, whatever it is. And that didn't happen for this child, it's hard to fathom. Judge Ashley tonight has the full story of Shanda Vander Ark, the woman accused of doing horrific, horrible things.
Norton Shores, Michigan police respond to an emergency call at 4788 Marshall Road. There they find 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson dead inside the home.
If you do this job long enough, you're going to see a lot of things that are very disturbing, are disgusting.
According to police, Timothy had special needs. He was severely malnourished, and there was evidence of abuse.
It's clear that this wasn't the first time that our victim, this 15-year-old, had suffered the hands of neglect and abuse.
Timothy Ferguson's mother, Shanda Vander Ark, and his older brother, Paul, were arrested. Investigators described how they say Timothy's family members brutalized him.
As punishment, our 15-year-old was subject to ice baths, was subject to not being fed food other than bread or bread soaked in hot sauce.
A neighbor spoke off camera with local station WXMI about the family.
It seemed like she was just, she's really to herself a lot.
According to the neighbor, Vander Ark and her family had lived in Norton Shores for a couple of years.
She doesn't come out much. Kids don't come out often at all.
Investigators say Vander Ark moved to Michigan from Oklahoma, where she had been investigated by child welfare authorities.
Instead of having her parental rights terminated, she voluntarily left the house, and from what we can tell, that's where the case kind of ended.
2 weeks after her arrest, Shanda Vander Ark was in a Muskegon County courtroom facing homicide and child abuse charges. And in an unexpected twist, it turns out she was no stranger to the courtroom.
I know that the defendant was working as a law clerk for the Waco Circuit Court. My understanding is right up to the point that she was arrested.
Vander Ark pleaded not guilty and is being held without bond. At her hearing, her attorney hinted at a possible defense.
There is a potential with lack of memory in this case to the allegations.
Timothy's brother Paul is also charged with child abuse and is expected to testify against their mother.
And he did testify today, and we'll hear some of that testimony, some of the inside look inside that house of horrors for this child. There was a word that was used there by one of the detectives, neglect. Child neglect is one thing. This is beyond neglect. This is like going out and doing things to torture a child, not just like not pay attention to the child. We've seen those cases as well, usually with small babies. This is next level stuff. So let me bring in our guest tonight. Joining me tonight in Rogers, Arkansas, host of the Hidden Killers podcast, Tony Bruschi is back with us. And in Jacksonville, Alabama, forensic death investigator, professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University, and host of the Body Bags podcast, Joseph Scott Morgan. Thanks, guys, for being here. Tony, you cover a lot of these stories, killers, right? Yeah. And I mean, have you come across the level of depravity, torture, and evil that we're hearing about in this case?
Unfortunately, the answer is yes to that, but this is one that certainly ranks up there where it's just so hard to fathom. And there are very few words to describe the level of darkness that one must have within their soul to be able to bring this kind of trauma upon your own child. The word evil is thrown around quite a bit. I don't know a better word for it, but this is such malevolent behavior. It defies any sort of logic for those of us who are healthy, normal individuals who love our children.
At Joseph Scott Morgan, we have covered so many cases through the years, and some terrible mothers, some terrible fathers. We're covering the Ferguson case, the boy in the box and all that, but like, this to me is like next level. You are going out there and you're creating and thinking of different ways to torture this child who has special needs.
Yeah, you are. And, you know, we have to frame this just so that folks understand. When Timothy was initially assessed, the postmortem assessment, he weighed about 60 pounds, Vin. He's 16 years old. Normally healthy male is going to range anywhere from about 111 pounds to 190 pounds. You know, there's some big kids that are out there, you know, depending upon their level of activity and, you know, body size and all that. He weighed 60 then. And then to kind of top all of this off, he's suffering from severe malnutrition, and that's probably what killed him. One of the things that they're talking about here is that his ribs were visible. And if folks at home will just imagine that the food, the energy stores that you have long-term fat storage in your body begins to consume those. And once those are gone, those fat stores, in the long term, you begin to digest muscle. Okay, so he would have been severely weakened and atrophied. And one more thing that's just really heartbreaking, Ben. The next time any of you guys go to a restaurant and you order something, say at a Mexican restaurant or a Cajun restaurant, understand that the peppers there that they use, cayenne and Tabasco, they're roughly at about 30,000 to 50,000 Scoville units, Ben. She was administering, allegedly, Carolina Reaper pepper sauce to this child. Vin, you know what the Scoville units are on this? 1.4 million Scoville units, all the way up to 2.2 million. And he was, they're placing this on bread. That's the only nutrition he was getting, and then giving him a bit of water. Imagine the horror involved in this.
Now, there are hot sauce shops where you go in and there's like, that's the challenge, right? If you can withstand, you know, one tiny little drop of that, and I've seen people do, including my son, one tiny drop
of their own free will.
Right, but of their own free will, like they're preparing for it, and you've got like a big milkshake and ice cream ready for you know, 5 minutes afterwards. Like 5 minutes, and I can't imagine they're feeding this child is looking for anything to eat, anything, because he's literally starving, and then to be fed that. I want to give folks an idea more of what's going on inside this house. Here's Officer Ryan Pieskey from the Norton Shores Police Department testifying about what they found inside.
That he was extremely malnourished, at least it appeared that way. Very skinny. You could see bones protruding from his body. You could see his ribs through his skin.
And did you then observe did you take an opportunity to observe the rest of the residents?
I did, yes.
And so we've already had it described, Officer Stefanich, a bi-level residence, and Timothy Ferguson's body located in the lower level of that residence. Did you have an occasion to observe the rest of the lower level at that time?
At some point during the day, I did observe the rest of the lower level. I don't know exactly where that falls in line with.
But you did at some point observe the lower?
Certainly, yes.
And specifically, did you have an occasion to observe that there were cameras in that residence?
Yes, there were several cameras throughout the lower level of the residence.
And at some point then, did you also observe the upper level of the residence? Again, not sequentially, but at some point.
Yes, I did.
Specifically related to the kitchen area, did you make some observations at the kitchen area?
Yeah, in the kitchen area, there were locks on some of the cabinets in the refrigerator, the freezer.
You already had an occasion to observe what you just described in terms of the kitchen area with locks on the freezer and the refrigerator?
Yes, I observed those things prior to speaking with her.
And did you ask her about those?
I did ask her about those.
And did she indicate to you what Timothy's connection was to the locks on the freezer and the refrigerator and any other access to food?
She indicated that those locks were to prevent him from sneaking food or snacking on food that he wasn't supposed to have. That there was a pantry that was open that he had access to, but he did not have a key to those locks.
Tony Bruschi, do we know anything about this woman's background that would drive her to such behavior?
I think that's a very good question. I mean, that's what I think we all wonder. The first thing that would come to mind is I'm going to guess that there probably was a history of abuse there. I don't know for sure, but in order for someone to kind of have this recipe for how they decide to parent their child, one would have to assume that there's some level of abuse, some level of hating oneself to such an extreme that one would put this onto their own child. But that's the thing. There's not a whole lot really known about the background of this woman, as far as I'm aware. But without a doubt, I would say 99% this is probably someone who had also been abused at some point in their life. And when you have that sort of recipe for a person, it oftentimes is repeated because it's all they know. Not an excuse for any sort of behavior like this whatsoever, but unfortunately, we do see the pattern over and over again. Yeah, completely.
Joseph Scott Morgan, we're looking at the videos from inside. I mean, that refrigerator is full of food. That freezer was full of food. And just locking it up, denying and putting cameras in place so just in case he's sneaking around somewhere, you can prevent him from getting food. This is depravity. This is your child.
Yeah, you stole my word there, Ben. It is depraved behavior, and here's why. I've worked cases over the course of my career involving drug-addled individuals that had children in the home, and the children are malnourished, but they don't have food in the cupboards, okay? Nothing at all. Here, their cup runneth over, if you will. And, can you imagine just this gnawing hunger? Your body is screaming, and there's food there. And if you're able, and I don't even know if this child would be ambulatory where he could walk, maybe drag himself across the floor, and he would sit at the base of these closed, locked doors that this woman, who is his caretaker, the person that's supposed to love him, had locked up, and he had no opportunity. And can you imagine the hell that followed? Because she's taking videography, Vin. She's making a record of this, perhaps, and that, woe be unto him if she sees him trying to approach one of these cabinets. It reaches a different level of depravity.
Let me ask you, Joseph, and for this child starving to death.
Yes.
What's going through the mind of a child as they're starving to death? Do we know how much suffering is involved in all of that?
Yeah, there's, like I said, obviously one of the first things you're going to see with malnourishment is dehydration. You're going to see atrophied conditions where the muscle is degraded to the point where they can't even move. I've had cases where people literally did try to drag themselves across the floor, but also you have this mental component that kicks in as well, where the individual will begin to hallucinate in this deprived state. They'll be talking out of their head, talking out of their mind. And, this situation is all about control. Can you imagine how enraged she would be if he is in kind of this non-lucid state where he's hallucinating and he won't be quiet? And it's because his mind is going to work, and you're in survival mode at this point, Finn. And it doesn't matter how much you're beaten or whatever else you're subjected to. You just want to eat. It would have been a hellish way to die.